I'm super excited to be here with Sarah Lane-Hawn today. We've talked about this all week. We published a playbook. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, multi-touch attribution reporting, something that if you're in marketing ops, I'm sure that you have plenty of conversations around, spend plenty of time trying to figure out how to do it. So that's what we're going to dig into today. Sarah, thank you so much for being here. This is your playbook. I'm super excited that you're sort of sharing a little more of the story behind it.
Thanks. I'm really excited to do this. When you first reached out to produce the playbook with me, it was great to be able to put it all down on paper and actually get it into the hands of other marketing ops people who can hopefully take advantage of this. I think we have all heard about marketing attribution for the last couple of years to the point that it's ridiculous, but doing it is still such a hard thing, right? Doing it in a way that's effective. So we'll get into more of the nuances today, like when is self-developed multi-touch attribution a good fit? When is it not? What are the things that you don't want to just go implement and then forget that there's this complexity of how you're going to have to interpret data? So we'll get into some of the nitty gritty and then, hopefully some good questions that I will attempt to answer. But I warned Stuart earlier, I'm a consultant. The 90% of what we do is to ask the hard questions and dig through it to then get to the answer. So may not have off the cuff answers, but still look forward to getting the questions.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to get into it. We've been referencing this playbook. If you're interested in checking that out and sort of using that as a starting point, head over to connectedgtm.substack.com and you'll find Sarah's playbook for multi-touch attribution there. And maybe we sort of start from, that's the thing that I'm working on, playbooks each week for folks who are trying to solve go-to-market problems in HubSpot. But Sarah, what are you focused on and where does multi-touch attribution fit with the types of companies that you're working with?
Yeah, so as a consultant, I definitely have a lot of clients coming in right now who are looking for multi-touch attribution. Some of them have had no revenue attribution model really for marketing, and then others are just looking for a more sustainable attribution model where they're not having to pay for really expensive software. So that's part of kind of the day-to-day for me is building it. But how it really comes up the most is that I'm a marketing operations strategist, right? So as much as I'm happy to go in, develop the program and do the build, my main goal is to hit the company goals, right? So we need to figure out what stage we're in. And I primarily do work with B2B SaaS companies that are between like Series A, Series C. So they're usually in a position where they're under fast growth. They need to be able to pivot quickly. They've already kind of figured out that, okay, there is product market fit. How do we expand from here? And so before getting into attribution, a big question is to take a step back, figure out, is this actually going to answer the need that we have? Or is it just a trigger word in the marketing space and a thing that we feel like we're supposed to be doing? And so that's one of the things I do want to talk about a little bit later on is this actually answering the need that people have or not?
Yeah, I think attribution, to your point, is such a hot topic. I know I've generally fallen on the side of there's a lot of effort that you can put into it, and sort of is the output of that really worth that investment in time? And I think that one of the things that is always going to be challenging for marketers is, how do you show the impact of work? And I'm curious your take on that is like, what is actually the goal of attribution? Like, is it as simple as we are building an attribution model to sort of prove that the work that we're doing is having an impact? Are we doing it for our own purposes? Or, in terms of where do we go allocate budget and spend? Or is there an entirely different reason that you would suggest is more important for the companies you work with?
I think that is the question, is that attribution is this big umbrella term, and you need multiple different types of reporting and analytics to answer the different business needs. So when we talk attribution, one purpose that people have in building it is to give credit, right? So we need to understand who gets credit for pipeline. Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it inbound versus outbound? That's one piece that is a need that people sometimes refer to doing attribution for. The other piece is, from a sales perspective, commission, right? How do we get commission over to our sales reps, to our partner reps? What does that look like? And then we also have the need for channel level insights to know Where do we double down on investment? How do we bubble up that narrative all the way up to the board level, right? So there's these different types of views within marketing attribution, and they're not all answered by the same format. So in fact, when it comes to revenue attribution and doing that on the channel level, I think, and I could be wrong because I'm still learning this too, but I think that the primary purpose of that is at the executive level. I think that we build revenue attribution to give a really clean one slide view of how is our revenue attributed to our different channels. And then that's the springboard for you to say, and then here's the narrative behind it from a marketing perspective. Here's why we know that webinars performed extremely well in pipeline generation over the last year and where we were doubling down and what we were pivoting to do that. Here's why we've found that content syndication is not the best channel for us in terms of how it impacts our revenue generation, right? And so the revenue attribution, really small snapshot, is, I think, perfect for that, to give a snapshot, to give something for the board to talk to, something for the executives to be able to take and run with. I do not think that it's useful for the marketing team members. And again, could be wrong, and if somebody's found an amazing way to use it, please tell me. But I think most marketing team members, you're still going to be in the weeds of your channel-based metrics and doing analysis there and figuring out how everything interacts with each other, and where your kind of multipliers are of inter-channel interactions. But the revenue attribution piece, I don't think is nearly as useful for the day-to-day as it is for the executive roll-up. Now, there's exceptions to that, and there's reasons to use it to compare like-to-like campaigns. I think is a great purpose for having some revenue tied to it. But yeah, that would be the biggest purpose, I think, is that executives need to see something that's a good summary for them to make decisions off of.
What I think I'm hearing is that, you want this one slide, the snapshot view, which gives you the sort of starting point, the sort of tip of the spear on here's why we're doing what we're doing or why we're investing the way that we're investing. And then you build the narrative around these are the specific things that we're doing to support that goal or that channel, that sort of direction or focus.
Yeah.
So for a day-to-day marketer who's optimizing channels, optimizing the specific work around performance, what is the next thing that they would look at? If it's not revenue, what is the next thing that you would suggest teams look at?
Yeah, so I do think there's still value in being able to see just quantitative detail about how many interactions we're having that end up associated to deals. So, deal influence, pipeline influence, AR influence. I still think that that's really valuable to look at the channel level. But then you as the marketer are the one, and as a marketing operations person should be the one to understand how things changed. Most of us are not in huge companies that are doing the repeatable campaign method month over month over month over month. And we're looking for the teeny tiny things to change. Most of us are in places where it's hey, this month we revised lead scoring and completely have a new MQL model, right? This month we signed 2 new content syndication partners and are changing how we do that, right? These events completely decided to do self-hosted, sponsored events instead of doing partner trade shows, right? There are change elements that just looking at a number for what was our webinar revenue, that doesn't give you any of that context. And so I think that's why for the channel owners, still diving into your day-to-day metrics is the right piece. And then your directors and CMOs, it's their responsibility to take all of that information and be able to say, okay, we made all of these decisions per channel for these strategic reasons, and they are now reflected in the total revenue attribution.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that there's the caveat to that is if you're on a team that doesn't necessarily have that sort of hierarchical structure, you may have to wear different hats as you're sort of thinking through, at what level am I setting strategy versus executing on that strategy versus optimizing performance against that sort of predefined or the strategy based on your revenue attribution.
Yeah.
So let's get into specific takeaways around the framework itself, around the Goldilocks method, as you've called it, which I love, because one of the things that you said is, making something that works across businesses, or can be applied across businesses and is the right fit for each specific business that you're working with. I'm curious, and for folks who are watching this, let us know what have been your challenges with attribution models that you might have worked with in the past. Like, where did this sort of come from? What is the sort of synopsis or the summary of the Goldilocks method, and like how did it come to be a thing that you built a framework around?
Yeah, so the Goldilocks method, or the Goldilocks model, is a multi-touch attribution model built within HubSpot Pro. The concept of it could be applied in any automation platform, but I specifically was building for HubSpot use cases. And the idea of it is that it is something that you fully control for your organization. You're defining which activities you actually want to measure and attribute to. You're deciding if you want to do weighted modeling. And so there's no confusion or lack of clarity around which activities count, how many times do they count, at which portion of the client lifecycle are we actually attributing those activities and that revenue. So it's really, the goal is just to bring clarity. When I outlined this, I was really excited to be able to accomplish is building something that is fully customizable, because that's something that I've run into as just a struggle as an operations person, is feeling boxed in by different software solutions and not having as much control as I would like to be able to make the data formatted in a way that I want to see it for my interpretation, for my use case. And this is a very malleable method that gives you control and that can then be edited in the future. So you're also not locked in to something for just right now and never able to change it. You can adjust in the future as need be. With that said, like, one of the biggest pain points that I've seen is that a lot of times there's multiple relative dates that you're working with when you're looking at attribution reporting. So you have, the origin of the contact date and all of the activities that happen up until the point of an opportunity creation. That's another date. And then you have everything that happens after deal creation all the way to deal close. Another date. You have 3 dates, how they're intersecting and how those respond to activity dates of what a contact is doing. Because of that complexity, a lot of models are just making assumptions. They're saying, we're going to attribute revenue based off everything in a client life cycle from the get all the way to closed one. And from the majority of marketing leaders that I've spoken to, they don't want that. They want to know what made the opportunity. What did we do in marketing to get the opportunity to start? We're not as worried about attribution of the actual sales cycle. We just want to know that first piece. And that's something that I couldn't easily get to with the software providers that I was using. So that was a big impetus to find out the best way to do it. And then even the actual attribution method, what I've built is linear. It's what I suggest anybody who's starting to use anyway, because it's going to give you the most raw data to analyze against and interpret before you start deciding which of the lovely ABC letters we would use for our attribution methodology in the future. So creating something that's linear, creating something that's controllable, that's the primary goals.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is when we first started talking about the playbook that you'd built, and you told me that it was, HubSpot has native attribution reporting, native attribution tools in HubSpot Enterprise. And one of the first things you told me was that you'd implemented this and built this model without Enterprise, just with Marketing Hub Pro. And that sort of stands out as, I think a lot of folks that I talk to is like, that may be one of the challenges that they're having is, well, we know that HubSpot might be able to help us do this, but we're going to have to upgrade, or, we're going to have to add Ops Hub, or we're going to have to add like extra hubs and extra functionality beyond what we're currently paying for in HubSpot. A big goal is, how do we make the most of what we've already bought? But I think that as we've talked about it more, like, that's actually just sort of a nice to have, is the cherry on top of the flexibility that you gain by implementing an attribution model in this way. And I think that that's sort of interesting that in comparison to custom tools or third-party tools that you might go and look at, like there's this sort of double benefit of doing it in HubSpot that shouldn't be overlooked in the just, we get to save money by not buying a more expensive tool, which is of course a good thing.
Yeah, the cost issue is absolutely a nice element of it. And certainly where people have come to me from before, right? It's just like, how do we do this in a way that's we're not having to spend $30,000, $60,000 a year? But the other piece is, I have spoken to other marketing ops leaders who do work with Enterprise Hub for HubSpot. And while some of the flexibility of the user interface and the fact that it can involve custom events, like there's some really lovely tools and aspects within those features, but there's still a lot of ambiguity of, but which activity? And if there's somebody comes through a paid ad and then they click on a link and then they fill out a form and they get to the gated content, like which one of those activities do we count for that visit? Or are we actually giving credit to all of those interaction points? There's just a lot of that doesn't have a lot of visibility yet. And hopefully with more training and more stuff that'll be available for people on Enterprise. But it seems like at least for right now, there's a lot more questions than answers, and that makes it really hard for people to adopt it. And then once they do get those answers, I don't know. I don't know if it's something that's still going to fully meet everybody's needs, or if it's just going to be more of the same, where there is an issue. It's only within these types of views, within these types of milestones, and it's not actually getting everything that they need.
I think it's interesting that it sort of fits with one of the big values of HubSpot generally as a platform, is that you can combine data from lots of different places. You can pull sort of lots of different interactions into one place and then build reporting and build your workflows and your customer journey around that data. And I think that's a really interesting point that, the custom events piece does give you flexibility to bring data that you may not otherwise have in an attribution tool into your attribution model. So we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about attribution in general, when to apply attribution, how to think about attribution, who is it important for, and then we were just getting into the model.
I've been doing attribution as kind of a deep dive over the last couple of years as attribution continues to evolve and change. And this playbook has really come out of my frustration with what's available for attribution, as well as just the output of me trying to figure out for myself and for my leaders, like, what is the purpose? What do we really need? And so as Stuart and I were talking about to ourselves earlier, was the concept that this type of methodology where we're doing revenue attribution is super effective for the C-suite level to use to navigate conversations with the board, right? So when we're talking financial decisions, when we're talking about where to invest capital, this is great because you have dollar figures, you're looking at channels, and then your C-suite executives have the responsibility to say, hey, the reason why our hosted webinars are performing so well at a revenue scale is because we're doing X, Y, and Z strategy. This is how we're surrounding the webinars. This is where we need to double down next year, why we need more money in this bucket. Meanwhile, content syndication, not doing so great. Here's why. Here's what we've learned. Here's our path forward, right? So I think it's great for macro level conversations. And that's really what I've built this model to enable, is linear attribution just for the types of activities and channels you care about monitoring and associating revenue with. For instance, if you don't care to associate revenue with email, don't include those activities. That's fine, right? Like, because at the end of the day, the attribution model is a tool. You get to decide what makes sense for your use case, for what you're trying to accomplish.
So we heard a little bit about the sort of the why attribution matters and why sort of a custom model might be interesting. Are there any cases where this is an obvious win, and then maybe more importantly, anywhere you'd be like, no, actually, you probably should go buy an expensive third-party tool?
Yeah, I mean,
because this won't cover it.
If somebody's needing this for their board and they don't have an attribution model in place, or they've been trying to do revenue attribution just with first or last, this is great. This is a step more granular, more dynamic, going to get you answers and get you further. If you're an enterprise offering and you've got just tons of data points and you want to capture all of your activities. And you just need to have something that you can go ahead, plug in, use it as it's been built. Absolutely, consider buying software and see what's right there. But this is very much for the team that wants the control, wants to be able to investigate and understand exactly what things mean. They want to come up with the definitions. This is for those people versus buying something out of the box.
Nice. So maybe let's sort of take a step back and sort of walk through the specific steps of the framework, because I think it's interesting for the topic as complex as attribution. There are relatively few steps, which I think is a sort of sign of a good framework in a lot of cases. So there's sort of 4 steps to the puzzle, right? There's counting marketing touch points, like how many of a specific activity is a company or a contact doing, timestamping each of those touch points, calculating the revenue attribution for each channel, and then reporting on that, which is ultimately sort of the end result that we want to get to. Like, why is it so simple for a problem that's so complex? And like, how do you think about that, actually getting that implemented? Are there things that you've learned that you started in one place and now it's ended up where it is today? Like, what are the sort of gotchas for folks to watch out for?
So I do think the concept, when you boil it down, is super simple, right? We want to know the activities. We want to know how many of that activity contributed to getting somebody down the funnel to a deal. And we want to attribute revenue back to them, right? It's a very simple concept. The counting of those activities is the hardest part of this entire thing. Before we even get to analyzing what this data is, just getting counts of how many times somebody has responded to a LinkedIn in-mail, for example, like getting that data into a usable format, time-stamped in a way that without having relative dates accessible in HubSpot, we can use it, like mind-boggling difficult. One of the hardest things that I've discovered as I've done iterations of this is every activity needs a different count process. So there's things that you can use HubSpot's built-in, like latest interaction or latest source fields. You can use some of those built-in things as like your default, and then you can build on top of it, right? Because there's things that it only goes so far. You have some more nuances that you want to build into it. So that does help alleviate like a third of the build that you might need to do. But the rest of it, you're going to have to think of exactly where is that data? How does it come in? When do you capture it? And what I've built is basically a ticker, right? So like when you're a line counter for something and you just have your ticker and you're counting how many people walk by you, that's the process of this method is using. Not looking at time stamping it, not looking at doing relative dates. Is literally just like, oh, that just happened. Cool. This person engaged with this material. We're stamping it. Those are accumulating on the company level. And then when we get a deal, we're time stamping and saying, hey, opportunity just got created. What are the counts today? Great. That's what we're going to use then for our opportunity creation, for our attribution. And then when the deal closes, timestamp it again. Okay, these are what the counts are for the company. At each of these activity types, now we can actually create the revenue calculation. But absolutely, those counts, the hardest part, it's not perfect. There will never be a perfect. But what I was surprised to find when I did on board with one of the bigger software systems was you had to do that still. That it was the same thing. Now, it was integrating it into their system versus using your own, but same methodology. You had to pick every single activity you wanted to monitor and say how you were going to monitor it, what the limitations were. So, for instance, if you want to include outbound activities, not just your inbound marketing, which calls from your SDRs are you going to count? Is it every single time they pick up the phone? Or is it just calls where they actually like talk to a human? Or do voicemails count? Or what if they talk to a human, but it's the gatekeeper and they find out it's the wrong account? Like, how do we start to streamline that? This is the activity that counts. So that is by far the biggest lesson that I've learned is the complexity that lies just in the basics of activity counting.
Yeah, I think it's such a great call out, and sort of one where doing it in HubSpot makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the time you're gonna have to answer these questions anyway, right? Like, what do you want to call? What do you want to count as an activity that matches what you're expecting of a rep? Or how does this data that or how does this interaction with a piece of marketing collateral get reported in the campaign that is, that asset fits within? And as soon as you introduce another system, it's, like any problem, is as soon as you introduce another system, you have all that same complexity and an integration to figure out at the same time. And I think that sort of simplicity in framework is what makes it flexible as well, right? Like you mentioned, you're only timestamping when you have an opportunity created or when you have a deal closed won, but you could pick any other moment in the life cycle to also stamp, right? Like there's no reason why you couldn't stamp. Like, what are the things that get people to go to their first webinar if you wanted to? You would just use the same methodology. Yep. So I think that's really interesting, and what makes it flexible across businesses and Goldilocks like in how it actually gets implemented.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I think is always interesting and can be challenging in HubSpot, and one thing that people will discover as they go back to the 20 minutes that they missed on LinkedIn Live in the final recording for this, is you sort of mentioned when we were just talking that a one-slide executive sort of piece to show this is why we're focused on what we're focused on is sort of ultimately one of the big outcomes of attribution reporting. How do you sort of start to get there once you have this data that's being timestamped, that's being, counted, the events are being counted as they happen? How do you sort of translate that into reporting, which is actually useful? Like, how do you make that, all the sort of complexity of the implementation, useful and usable on the other side?
Yeah, what's interesting is the output of this is actually very simple, like super deceptively single pie chart simple. And so you're going to define the time at which, you want the revenue, and then you can have the complexity of, do we just want to talk about giving credit to activities that happened up until the opportunity was made? Do we want to give credit to activity through the entire client lifecycle up until you closed one? Do we want to give revenue credit based off of activities of everyone associated with that client company, or just the primary point of contact? Like, there's a lot of decisions to make, but the final output is just saying, great, then webinar gets accredited to this much revenue. Your content syndication's this much, your email's this much, your paid media, right? And it literally just puts it in a pie chart to be able to see, here's how much revenue we're going to associate with each of these channels for this period of time, based on the decisions that you made. So it's actually very streamlined, very easy to then have 3 graphs, in a slide deck for your executive team. It doesn't have to be overly nuanced. Within the team, you can decide, which fits best for the narrative that you're creating and trying to explain. But as long as you know whether we were trying to impact pipeline generation versus revenue one, and if we were doing that with an ABM motion or just with a primary purchaser, you've got the information you need to then go build it out in a way that's going to be visible and simple.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think that's one of the things that we talked about as we were putting the playbook together was sort of clarity on how do you actually go read the data. And that's often a challenge. Like whenever you're presenting data, right, it's like, do people actually understand what this is showing? Does everybody have shared understanding of what we're looking at together? And I think it's a huge advantage of having a sort of quote unquote simple output. I'm curious what questions you've had, or what have been some of the questions that you've received from clients as you've been implementing it? Like, what are the things that you maybe, misconceptions or things that people didn't realize that would be a question when they sort of set out to solve their attribution problem?
Yeah, one, pulling back even further, I had a team contact me like 2 or so weeks ago, a RevOps team, who were looking to be able to support their marketing work better. And so they were asking me about attribution models, like, should we use linear? Should we use J? Should we use a W, right? Like, we were talking about the different type of models. And I asked them, I was like, did someone ask you to build this? Did C-suite require this? They're like, well, no, we want to help. We want to know what's going to help our marketing team. And that got us in a great discussion around KPI development and channel level analytics. And that for them, since nobody was asking for revenue attribution, they could actually do a lot more good providing really phenomenal channel-based analytics than jumping straight into the deep end of revenue attribution. Within the build, though, the things that people don't consider often are kind of those time banding of, we want to know revenue within this year, but we're going to associate it to activities that happened at any point in time along the company's journey only up until the opportunity was created, right? Like there's this complexity in picking and choosing how you're going to build that. And people don't think about that. They just want the end number, and then they've missed that that's how it's calculated. And then I'd say the weighting is the other. Like I've done a build where I advised them not to do any weighting because they had picked very specific channels that they were highly investing in. And those are the only ones that they were going to do this revenue attribution for. And so I wanted them to have as clean and crisp of data as possible to interpret. But another client, they threw it all in the mix. And so we had like 16 base channels with like over 22 kind of sub pieces to that. And so for them, they had both partner engagement and email in the same model. So it was very important for us to say, no, a single email click does not equate to a partner conversation. We need to put some stipulations on this and agree on the weighting. So yeah, those are probably the two. And I tend to try to serve up the true complexity of like, here's your 5 ways in which these look like the exact same report, and yet they're completely different and they answer completely different questions. And so I think being able to help people pull out that complexity so that then they can make the actual business decisions off of it, like that's part of this that I love.
That totally makes sense. And I think is a testament to how deep you've gone on this problem with specific businesses who are trying to solve it, right? And I'm one thing that I'm always curious about with anything that is sort of simple on the surface, complex underneath, is like, what does it actually look like as an investment on the business side to go build this? Like, I think when you're comparing a custom built solution to any sort of build versus buy decision, is like, well, there's a clear price tag on the software that we're going to buy, which admittedly is not the total cost of ownership. Like there is a whole lot of implementation, everything that goes with that.
Yeah.
But there is sort of, no cost essentially on implementing something yourself, unless you're, having to upgrade or whatever. But what does it look like from a sort of a time perspective, from a, obviously engaging with a consultant, engaging with Sarah is, going to help you shortcut things, but has an expense. But from a like team's time to answer these questions, to know what are the things that should be included, to actually go build this out.
Yeah.
What does that sort of look like from a sort of high level perspective?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you use the Goldilocks methodology playbook and kind of walk through that, I mean, I'll be interested to hear back from people, like how far they get. Like, are they able to put together the entire attribution method through this? Be able to get it live? How much time does it take? Like, I'm very curious to hear that from others. From my perspective, like under 2 months, we can get something ramped up. Now, the biggest time suck is going to be backfilling data. So you can set up the model so that today forward, every activity gets counted, gets credited, gets right. That part, not too time consuming, but then you start having to go, okay, how do we find historically what happened within time frames? Again, HubSpot, we don't have relative times. Like, how do we make this happen? And that is what becomes really strenuous and can become a really manual process, and doing a lot of, data cleanup in Excel. Not super fun. But yeah, about 2 months of effort to be able to focus on that and run it as a sprint. I will tell you that, like, when I first was brand new to multi-touch attribution and I did it with a provider, it took me 6 months to set up within a provider network, and we were paying $50,000 a year for that service as well. So both their head of marketing ops was heads down doing this for months, and it was an extreme cost to the business. And so I definitely think, again, like, not to do something just because it's cheap, but if that is like a concern, is time to ramp up and time for it to have ROI, like, I think it's a good option to consider, especially if you want that control versus whatever they're going to hand you as, this is what you got, this is how you have to use it, because we can't be, more flexible than that.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really interesting sort of just talking about that ramp time, like the question in the chat here around, what do you actually need from a tooling perspective to build an attribution model, sort of specifically, like, how do you start pulling in data from disparate sources to include in your attribution model? And that sort of may end up being related work, but is sort of going to be the same work, whichever method of implementing attribution you pick. You're going to need your data in a usable format and accessible in the tool that you're going to build attribution in. You also mentioned this earlier, but like, if that's HubSpot, then you're going to get the added benefit of being able to use that data for other things beyond just attribution. So how much data you pull in is going to be a question of how much time and effort are you willing to invest in doing that, and how, if the answer is not everything, then your attribution model is going to reflect that however it's implemented.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to know, like, you're going to run into other paywalls. So even though, this is within HubSpot Pro, like, depending on what you're trying to count from activity perspective, especially from external elements, like LinkedIn's a great example. If you're doing a bunch of outbounding and you're using LinkedIn and Sales Nav, there's a lot of limitation in what kind of data you can get back in on a contact level in terms of engagement. And so there's paywalls on the LinkedIn side, right? Not even the HubSpot side, that you might have to determine if it's worth it or not to be able to get that data inside. Or if, like, I like using custom events for tracking, or custom objects, for tracking events. And so to do that, you have to have enterprise, but you can have sales enterprise. So just everybody remember, if you ever need enterprise, make sure that you actually need marketing enterprise. You can sometimes get away with sales enterprise hub instead. But that said, like, there are other paywalls and pay considerations that you might have to go through as you're doing this, but it still seems to be a much more palatable and much easier to ramp up.
Totally. And I think it's a good sort of reminder, like, you're going to have to map out what do you want to include as a starting point, and you can then sort of figure out at that point, before you go invest in actually building anything and buying anything, what is the data that we already have access to, and what is the data that we're going to either have to integrate or going to have to figure out, sort of tracking from scratch, right? Like, there are things, which I think is one of the big challenges of attribution in general, right? Is that there are a lot of things that happen in the buyer journey outside of sort of visibility of a company, and sort of acknowledging that, but also figuring out, like, how much of that can you, like, is there a way to capture, is another question entirely. But to sort of close out, for folks who want to go and implement this, or even just have more questions about attribution and multi-touch attribution, specifically the Goldilocks framework that, Sarah, you put together, where should they be going to engage with you besides sort of asking questions here? Where should they be heading to do that?
Yeah, I mean, on a general scale, like, LinkedIn is where I hang out. So that's always a good place to find me. But I also have an open calendar. And so a lot of people can attest to this. You can attest to it as one of the people that I've met this way. But I am an open book. And so if people ever want to talk, they can book time. We could chat. If I can point you in the right direction at a 30-minute call, like, by all means, let me cheerlead you to success in that way, right? If it becomes something where you really feel like you need just a strategic advisor, but you want to own the program, you want to execute this for your company, great. Like, let me do that for you. Obviously, if somebody needed a full program build, like, I do that too. But for me, it's really more like, how can I equip people to be able to get to the resources that they want? But we've also got the playbook on Connected GTM. That's a great resource. I've got my link tree there. Like, you can always find me at MOPs Ferry, and we can set up time to chat beyond that. But I did have somebody who contacted me a couple days ago because of the playbook, actually. And we were chatting, and within 30 minutes, we off the call, and he was just like, I was not expecting to get free consulting and free strategy help during this call. And I'm like, well, here we are. Like, if the ideas come, you're going to get it, right? Like, I'm not going to be paywalling my own ideas for you. So if I can help in any way, like I'm here to support the community.
Awesome. And so drop these in the chat, but connect to GTM, substack.com. We'll make sure that everything, both the playbook is there and also this conversation with the recording and sort of any follow-up Q&A questions and answers will include there as well. To connect to GTM playbooks for sort of GTM problems in HubSpot each week, but we'll make sure that this is there and available. But yeah, thank you so much to Sarah for doing this, for putting the playbook together, for sharing her experience and expertise with everybody. If there's one thing that folks should be thinking about for attribution, like as a starting point, what's the one takeaway that they should watch the end of the recording to get?
Oh my gosh. Number one is, do you need it? What's the point, right? If you know the point, you'll be able to build it correctly. If you don't know the purpose, then we need to talk. So that'd be my number